Hi, welcome to another episode of Going Elliptic. I'm Paul, and here with Shanky. We're here really to give you some great insight and educational tips and tools in your crypto trading journeys. And it goes without saying, none of this is investment advice. We can't actually tell you what to do, only how to read the markets. So yeah, let's see what's been happening in the markets this past week. And in that overarching kind of story of what's the correction that we're in the middle of at the moment. How you doing, Shanky?
Doing well, Paul. How about you?
Yeah, feeling good. Still feel like there's a lot of uncertainty in the market. It's up, it's down, it's kind of swing trading a lot. And still not enough volume to really, or conviction, I should say, to really see that the market's going to go in a particular direction anytime soon.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, and we'll dig deeper. But I think you kind of summarized it well, that it's still range bound, still sort of swinging up and down, and things haven't really changed, despite the narrative, despite the overexcitement one day and then the down the second day among a lot of crypto Twitter and just general crypto influencers. The reality is what happened back on May 19th is still unfolding. It has not completely done its job, if you may, right? So
yeah. And maybe there's still months of this ahead. It's hard to see what would be the point that makes a big move in either direction. So
that's true. Yeah, a lot of sideways, for sure.
Yeah, so last week we spent quite a bit of time looking at the majors. No doubt we're going to look at those again. What else have people requested for us to chat?
Well, people have asked for a whole bunch of alts. They've asked for DOT, BNB, Solana, WET, Kusuma, a whole bunch of tokens. Link, ICP. I think people have asked for a whole, a whole gamut of things. I don't think we'll be able to cover them all. I wish we could, but I doubt that in this session we'll cover them all. I think what might be best is for us to pick up a few of those, right? And so we can just sort of at least help people think through how to parse the data, how to read the charts, and then maybe some individual pieces we can follow up. We can maybe make a commentary in a Twitter thread or maybe some other recording, right? And
yeah, perfect. And yeah, if you are tuned in, do feel free to get in touch with us on our Twitter account at Going Elliptic, and we've also got a newsletter at Going Elliptic on Substack. So yeah, that's the best ways to kind of follow all the other content that doesn't make it into these weekly video streams.
Yeah, 100%. And newsletter, we've been working on a lot of detailed newsletters. We need to ship some. So I think, hopefully you'll see it in the coming next few days. There's some good content there. Lots of details around how to read Bitcoin price and alt prices and DeFi at large. So there's a lot in the making. So we'll keep publishing it as we keep moving forward.
Great. Should we jump into the majors?
Well, let's do it. Let's start with Bitcoin. Okay, here we are. Yeah, so before we start jumping into the price action and market structure, just a couple of high-level items. Everyone's super excited about the last couple of days when Bitcoin broke through 40K, right? And a couple of big green candles. People are excited about it, rightly so. We just want to parse and see what that means, right? So if you look at this chart, and this is something we've discussed a few times, Paul. We saw this happen around 60K, right? Where Bitcoin was trying to break 60K, made multiple attempts. This was not as close as 60K, but it went as far up as 58. And then the three peaks, if you may, each time trying to break through, and finally it collapsed down. I think at a slightly smaller level, as we had discussed a couple of weekends now, last weekend, the weekend before, essentially a couple of charted sessions, we had predicted, just looking at how the market was going sideways and very range bound, that it's bound to go and test 40K, and it'll probably try that a few times, perhaps 3-4 times before it either breaks through or it gives up and goes down. And so in some sense, that's what's unfolding if you really think about it, right? One attempt right after the big, sort of crash, if you may, or the big sets of red candles that brought the price all the way down, 20K down. And then after that, there was another attempt. This didn't go all that far and pulled back very quickly. And this one seems to be a little stronger, something with a little more conviction than the ones we had seen before. But the big question is it a breakout or a fake out? So.
Yeah, and also looking there, we haven't had a lot of high volume kind of candles there. It's definitely one of the largest buying volumes in the last 2.5 weeks.
That is
other
correct.
than the ones during that downward spiral. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think 100% there. In fact, if the case for volume that you make is very interesting. We saw a lot of volume up here, right? So earlier in the year, we saw this, right? The volume profile was quite high. It was picking up. Of course, there are some days when it spikes a whole lot, but even at a general level, the volume was fairly high if you just look at these bar charts. And then, it sort of died down when it was close to 60K and was struggling to find its new price point. And then it picked up a little bit, but this pickup was really when the market turned bearish. Market turned down. The big spike on May 19th, heavy sell-off. And then after that, again, it has become fairly small, or low volume territory. So most days we aren't seeing a lot of trading activity. The trading activity has fallen. I also suspect that part of it is just a consequence of the market, right? The market hasn't been moving a whole lot, right? And definitely not directional
Sure.
and trend-based. So maybe people aren't doing that much of leverage trade, right? They've reduced their leverage, or they're sitting by the sidelines trying to figure out what's happening, and will probably enter at some point in time. That's my suspicion, but we'll have to maybe look at the data a little bit more. Now, if you look at this particular price point here, what do you think, Paul? What is your gut feel? Is it going to break 40K? Sit around there? How do you think about that?
I still think it's going to swing again. We're just not seeing enough. Even though we kind of say, hey, it's a horizontal kind of market at the moment, or a sideways market, it's still doing that in a range, and I just don't see it really sitting very long at 40K. Maybe it won't go back as far down again as your kind of 32s, but I think it's going to be high 30s for at least a few more days.
I think you're right. So, I'm going to zoom in a little bit more here, since this is the area of interest, right? So if you see here, the price has been very range bound, extremely range bound. In fact, for the most part, since the beginning here. So let's look at it. How many days is this? This is from day 19th May. And this is how many candles? That's 27 bars. So 27 days, right? 27 candles. If you think about this, what we have really seen is for a majority of them, I would say 80-90% of them, barring these one or two extreme moves on either side. So the price has been more or less between these two price points, between 34,000 and a change and 37,000 and a change. So, essentially sort of in that 3,000-4,000 range, essentially going up and down, right? Up move, down move, up move, down move, up move, right? And then it broke through this, but it still is in this sitting in this very important area of value. So the way to understand this is that this area of value has been tested a few times. This is not something from this run, but if you go back, the reason we created this area of value is because it tested also on its journey up. When it went back up or went down, it kind of hovered around that. So these price points, it does seem to settle around, and these price points end up becoming either areas of support or areas of resistance. Right now, of course, it's acting as a major force in terms of area of resistance. Question is, can it break through, right? And I think you're extremely right. I think the signs aren't very clear yet. There's no indication which says, hey, there's enough momentum, it's going to break through. I know people get excited with these big sort of green candles, but this big green candles also means that perhaps at this point in time, whoever had to buy has already bought, right? So that's why there was a big, strong move. And usually when the market is range bound, for a lot of swing traders, these big moves are great price points to enter, especially when the market reverses, because they expect the price to sort of come back to the next level of equilibrium, right? So for that matter, right now, it's closer to the same area of value. It has opened red. There's a good chance, some will do, some will indulge in profit taking. Some of this would be just, sort of sell pressure at this price point. And you're right, maybe it'll settle somewhere around here rather than go all the way down here. But it's definitely going to go through the price discovery process somewhere here for sure. Yeah, that's what it looks like.
We've also looked at this on longer time scales as well. So we looked at, kind of weekly, and I think even given the number of green candles in this week, I still don't see that we've really done enough to break that bearish trend. This is still looking only moderately bullish again. Like, it's just not enough to really reset. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think you're right. So there is one small danger, so to speak, that has been averted, at least in the short term. And I think traders are aware of it. So maybe there's a concerted effort to try to avoid it, and change the mood. So at the weekly level, the 50-week EMA has traditionally been an important, sort of a trend line, if you may, right? It's a moving average that acts as a nice trend line and a long-term trend line for Bitcoin's price going up and down. And whenever it breaches below the 50 EMA after, a little bit of a surge up like we had seen earlier this year, usually it's a confirmation of the bearish movement, right? And then it sort of starts correcting even more sharply. We saw it hovering around this 50 EMA and touching it a few times, right? We saw it when the price crashed, right? That the week when we saw a massive sort of decline in price, right, where it came all the way from 60,000 to almost 30,000 territory. And then even in the following weeks, it essentially has been hovering around this range, right? And there was suspicion that it'll probably break through and go down. Now, a little bit of price surge this week. Now, remember that this week has barely begun, so don't read too much into this. This is day one of the week, right? Or day 1.5, right, if you take UTC. And so the day 1.5, the very first movement, looks like we're still up there with a nice gap from the 50-week EMA. So in a sense, showing a nice up movement to price uptrend as compared to the 50 EMA. Having said that, if this corrects all the way back down and crashes through it, well, we're back where we were. Nothing's changed, right? And
yeah,
it's very possible because we still have 6 more days to go in this week, so it's barely begun. We'll see how the week pans out. Yeah, something to just look at. The other piece that I think worth looking at is, if I'm going to move back to the day level, and now I'll start looking at a couple of other things. So for example, let's look at the usual ones. For example, if people look at stock to flow, right? And if you look at stock to flow, I think it should be Bitcoin stock to flow. I think Bitcoin stock to S2F, S2. There was a stock to flow here. It's case sensitive, so sometimes it becomes interesting.
Yeah, I've got to save that one to our favorites next time.
Yeah, probably we should. I'm wondering whether it is there. Did we put it? No, it's not in the favorites. Okay, yeah, we'll probably add it in. But what I wanted to point out and show was the stock to flow, and I'd seen this a couple of days back, is showing the price should be somewhere around here, even above that, like 90K or so. Okay, and
yeah, there was a lot of noise about we were going to see 100K Bitcoin by the end of 2021 based on stock to flow, but
correct.
It's hard because that doesn't factor in so many of the other external things like news from China, or even just the on-chain metrics aren't really captured in that valuation model.
No, totally. And so that makes me wonder, how reliable is that metric at large, right? Like, what good is that indicator? Because at this price point, it's more than 2 times the value away from what it says it should be, right? So it says it should be at 90K and it's at close to 40K. So it's 50K away, which is more than the price itself. So the margin of error in my definition is too high, right, for it to be taken seriously. So I think that stock to flow doesn't seem like it's a very good model, at least for predicting Bitcoin price. I know it's a very celebrated model. Everyone talks about it, and everyone in the Bitcoin world, the maxi world, is very enamored by it. But the reality is, if you just objectively look at that, right, forget the all the sort of excitement around, but just objectively look at it, I just refuse to believe that there is an indicator that is so wrong that could be used, right? It's almost like your scale measures it 100% incorrectly, or more than 100% incorrectly. That's what it's saying, right? At this point in
Yeah.
time. So,
One of the thoughts I've had, but would need more analysis, is whether if you took the top 5 kind of cryptos for the last say 5 years and actually tried to combine them all into a crypto 5 stock to flow, would that better align with the total value that is being created across those as an indication of the value of those cryptos, because it is very amorphous. You can move value between Bitcoin and Ethereum and even Smart Chain very easily. So yeah, one model and one currency makes it a little bit harder to really pin it down.
yeah, true. Although I must say that Bitcoin is the one that narrative is very much based upon scarcity. Although now, if you look at ETH, the new narrative is building around it being ultrasound money, right? Which is more scarce than the scarce thing. But having said that, I think that is not the primary foothold, so to speak, or that's not the primary way that most ETH maxis and ETH lovers approach it. I think the ETH lovers usually are seeing the world of ETH from the eyes of DeFi and growth and smart contracts, right? Like it usually gets associated with that as much as supply. Supply, of course, is now in the narrative. So the ultrasound money narrative is also, sort of making sense to some. But I think that the other narrative is more powerful, right? But from a Bitcoin standpoint, because now it's very established. I mean, it started long back whenever it emerged back in 2009 or so, and in the early years as a peer-to-peer currency, right? And off late, in fact, if you look at El Salvador and others, they have made it a legal tender, thinking it's going to be a currency. But honestly, I think Bitcoin has lost being a currency. I don't think it is anymore even viewed by Bitcoin maxis themselves as a currency. I mean, they're all rallying behind this adoption by the government, which is cool, because it will basically lead to broader Bitcoin adoption, and Bitcoin price might see appreciation and people will talk about it. So it's all positive press, which is great. But the bottom line is that I don't think anybody, even in the Bitcoin world, would take the concept that Bitcoin is a currency. Bitcoin is something that you can buy and sell products with very seriously anymore. In fact, I think the narrative that is very powerful is that, hey, this is a great investment. It's a hedge against inflation. Sit on it and you're going to become rich, right? The supply is so scarce. This is the real gold, right? Which you can also sort of keep in the words and, flee your country if you need to flee, and nobody's going to stop you with your gold bars. So I think the narrative has really gone around store of value, right? Store of value and the whole digital gold. So in that light, when you start looking at it from a store of value and digital gold standpoint, yeah, it makes sense. I mean, supply is the only metric. What else are you going to measure something that is supposed to behave like gold, right? Digital or otherwise. Then you start looking at how precious is it, right? So that's how I think about it. I'm sure that there would be disagreements on this front. If we asked 5 people, there would probably be like 15 opinions. But I think this definitely is a trend.
And it's also interesting, we were touching last week on the different narratives between Ethereum and Bitcoin, and it still seems like Bitcoin's the most sensitive to what's happening in the news cycle. And, we somewhat saw that just these last 2 days, and, positive news there for Bitcoin. Bitcoin shot up. That's where we were testing the 40K. And Ethereum was, a lot more sluggish. It wasn't news directly related to Ethereum, so should it follow Bitcoin up? And that was interesting to see as well, because while there's that very strong correlation historically, it's
Mhm.
just not always lining up. And we see that in the ETH to BTC charts where, yeah, sometimes it looks like Ethereum's outperforming Bitcoin, and then other times Bitcoin claws that back, and we're back with Bitcoin dominant again.
Yeah, it's a good point. And let's maybe look at that a little bit, ETH BTC. So the bit about Bitcoin, right, is that Bitcoin is extremely narrative driven. And the narrative really is, as we already discussed, around scarcity, but also around the fact that it's extremely sensitive to news because, in some sense, if you look at it, it's all about, hey, who else is looking at it as a store of value? Who else is valuing it high? So I think if you just parse that down, it's the news is really about what's the value of Bitcoin, not so much the use of Bitcoin, but what's the value of Bitcoin. And I think a lot of the news that impacts the value of Bitcoin, either positively or negatively, really makes a difference on the price right away, because everybody else who's
Sure.
listening to it says, okay, so now somebody's made it legal tender, it's a whole country, well, the value has gone up, right? Because they're valuing it more than, let's say, comparing to the dollar, right? So therefore, let's go and value it higher. Other hand, the news comes out and says, well, hash rate is now falling, China is banning it. And so then it translates really to the fact that, oh, maybe the security properties are being compromised. Maybe, we will not see people holding Bitcoin as much, and therefore the value is not as much, and therefore the value is decreasing. Right? Same thing is with, hey, is Elon pro Bitcoin or anti Bitcoin? So,
only Doge.
exactly. So
yeah.
I think that directly impacts it. But if you look at ETH, we haven't seen that narrative really being correlated, because ETH narrative is very different. It's around smart contracts and scaling. It's a little bit more technical and feature driven, so to speak, rather than just value driven. In fact, most people, most news items don't talk about the value of Bitcoin. Nobody's discussing, I mean, ETH. Yes, there are some people who would say ETH is going to 5K and 10K and 7K, but most of the news isn't like that. News is really around, okay, what is the kind of DeFi applications people are building, right? We are looking at things like EIP 1559, which is a highly technical concept, which is news in the world of ETH, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the same thing parallel in Bitcoin is having zero impact. For example, nobody is discussing any of, Lightning standards or improvements in, in any of the other core pieces of Bitcoin. That used to be the case a few years back. A few years back, people would talk about it in the Bitcoin world, where people would discuss things like, how about scale? What about the transaction fee? What about, things, and things like Lightning came out of those initial efforts. But now I feel like those things don't affect the price at all. Lightning could become the most popular thing in the planet, and you won't see a small impact on the Bitcoin price. Nobody will care for it. But right now, if there is like a suspicion that Tanzania might also adopt it as a legal tender, well, that will make news, right? Because it has directly related to the value. So it's a little bit of that,
I think also, kind of a lot of the journalists have only, kind of really picked up and written stories when there is price action as well. So it's kind of, we don't see as much in the mainstream kind of news cycle unless something's happening with price and somebody's bought a Lambo or somebody's just foreclosed on their house because they, shouldn't have borrowed against it to buy crypto. And I think that definitely adds to kind of the noise that makes it very hard to then get into what's actually new progress or on-chain metrics or things that I should be paying attention to. So
yeah, no, 100%, you're right there. Also, if you think about it, I think the voices have changed, right? So while the voices in the world of ETH, and not only ETH but many others also, blockchains, right? For example, Solana or Dot or even Cardano for that matter, I think everybody's position is a little bit, at least the noise that they're creating is all a little bit more technical, right? Like at least a little bit more about scale and scope and, making the world computer and so on and so forth, right? Even Definity or whoever else, right? Like everybody is bound on that. But I think Bitcoin has kind of separated itself from that narrative completely. And In fact, if you look at the opinion makers there, right? For example, the biggest voice these days is of course Michael Saylor, because he keeps buying Bitcoin and keeps the price up, and he keeps borrowing and buying, and now apparently today he's put something out where he's going to sell a whole bunch of MicroStrategy shares to buy Bitcoin. And I think that's not a bad choice for him, honestly. I mean, honestly, I think that MicroStrategy should probably transform itself into something like Grayscale and just become a Bitcoin holding company, right? A Bitcoin fund. That might be better off, because they're anyway very committed to it. It seems like he's totally sold
Yeah.
in anyway, so why not, right? But I'm just saying, like, that is the majority voice there. So I think like all other voices have been drowned in this price-driven agenda, so to speak, which may be good for Bitcoin and maybe good for the entire crypto community, because price also gets positive attention. So we'll see how that plays out.
Yep.
Yeah, so going back to ETH BTC that you mentioned, yeah, it is indeed a very interesting curve. There are two things to be seen here. One is that, of course, it's still trending fairly strongly at, above EMA 50. The trend has become weaker. There was a time when it was above EMA 20, especially in these periods, right? And there were two big surges where ETH was really going strong against Bitcoin. We saw that in May, right, where ETH really shot up, and this is around the time when ETH also, got to its almost all-time high levels. And then, of course, when the decline happened, BTC fell hard, and then ETH fell harder, right? So BTC again looked a little stronger, right, relatively speaking. And then recovery again, we saw portions where ETH seemed like it was recovering, but now it's at a point where the trend in some sense is broken, right? We saw this pullback again and again, sort of it's hovering around that mark where it's, as you rightly said, they're sort of equal. One's going up, the other's going up. There isn't really a very clear correlation at this point in time between the two. So just something to bear in mind. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think also as we keep seeing those different narratives, there is some speculation that ETH could move separate to Bitcoin, but we haven't seen that yet. So
not yet. And in fact, that's one of my, just as somebody who reads the market more technically, and both of us do that. I think it's been one of our desires to see the market become a little less correlated. We've also done some correlation matrix and such analysis in the past. And the piece that is not very encouraging in the crypto world, unfortunately, is that the markets tend to be highly correlated, especially when the market gets in this phase of indecision. It seems like the whole market either becomes bullish, whole market becomes bearish, or when the market is confused, everything is confused, right? There is no clear winner that would still come out strong, right? And we've seen that with ETH as well, right? Like if you look at where ETH was a few months back versus now, not much has changed really. If you think about it from a fundamental standpoint, there's still a ton of DeFi adoption going on. There's still a lot of things being built on the ETH platform. EIP 1559 is surging ahead with confidence. There's a lot going on in the world of ETH. But the price seems to be going with the trend, right? Like it almost feels like the price has ignored all of that development suddenly for the last few days, because the larger correlation factor has just taken over. So yeah, so I think that's important part of the story. ETH, if you look at it again, one angle we've been using for a while is the Fibonacci retracement levels, and ETH is fairly pulled back from its all-time high levels where it reached closer to 4,500, right? 4,372 is where I put the marker. I don't know if that is the absolute all-time high, but somewhere there. And we did see it pull back a fair bit, right? And if you look at it where the price is, it's slightly above the 0.5 retracement level. So from where it had started to its all-time high, it's pulled back almost 50% of that value. Question is, does it go back up, right? And as we've discussed, this trend still is net positive in the sense that it is still above EMA 200. It's a weakened trend, right? It's not a strong trend, but it's still in the net positive uptrend category. If you look at it this place, it has been extremely range bound. So again, let's sort of zero in here. And this is really the period since we saw this crash and sideways movement, and this is extremely sideways, right? So if you were to just draw a couple of lines here.
Yeah, and at that scale, it's looking very similar to the Bitcoin chart with kind of two peaks there and the start of a third.
Exactly, yeah. So that's the piece. They're all just so highly correlated, behave so similarly that there is not much you can read beyond here, right? So it's been like between these two price points, 2849 and 2289, right? And it's gone like that, down and up and down and up and down and up again, right? So it's the classic sort of range bound motion of up and down and up and down. In fact, I would say, just digressing a little bit, if you're a swing trader, this is like your dream come true, because you see this big green candle, a couple of other greens, you see the turning back of red, that this was a resistance level in the past, you go short here, you take profit right here, again it turns green, go long here, again this is the resistance level, take profit here, go short here, and so on and so forth. You can keep repeating this every couple of days. It's risky. We're not saying you should do it necessarily, do it with your own sort of trading strategy, but it just appears like there's this golden opportunity for swing traders to trade all of them, basically all of them moving like that. You can pick your, take your pick, if you may, right? You can trade Bitcoin like that, you can trade ETH like that, and go up and down, and leave some breathing room, right? Like don't try to squeeze every penny out of it, but if you leave some breathing room, I think there is some money to be made there.
Yeah, and it seems like most of the market is on the sideline waiting for a clear trend, and so perhaps just the ratio of algo and swing traders to the rest of market is strengthened from that, because so many people aren't trading. And it's, until we see another strong trend, it'll keep swinging. I just don't see any reason for it to stop.
That is correct. And despite the narrative again that, hey, we've broken and now we're going to see all-time highs, I think the assessment that both of us are saying is it's not clear yet. There's nothing that is showing that as a clear evidence. We are seeing it attempting to break, right? BTC, and maybe BTC breaks through and stays up top for at least 3-4 days, and it's a real breakout. Sure, maybe the market can go with it. But even for that to happen, there is so much more to unfold. Volumes need to pick up. At least you need to see a few days of trading above 40K. You need to start seeing everything else sort of turn the page, if you may. And sure, if that happens, the market's going to go back. If not, I don't see the market going anywhere. It's going to remain going sideways, and in some sense, it'll keep people guessing. It's going up, going down, going up, going down, right? And depending on the day of the week, one trend might look stronger than the other. So just moving to a couple of other altcoins that people had asked for. The reason that I was shying away from going necessarily into each one of them is because we already discussed this concept of correlation, and as it so happens, the alts are also all highly correlated. In fact, I think alts are more correlated to ETH, right? So if you look at, for example, ETH USD, it's moving within certain price range. It has pulled back about roughly 50%. You go to BNB. And it seems identical story. It's pulled back about 50%. It's moving in a range. So there's what else can you read from this chart? Right? So it's sort of strange, but it's true, right? It's so correlated that it almost seems like it's been programmed. You know what I mean? Like there is a algorithmic level of setting in the market which says, hey, each pull back 50%, BNB, go pull yourself back 50%, right? It's moving whatever, 2% up and down, you also move 2% up and down, kind of stuff, right? So, but it's really like that, that's how the market is behaving at the moment.
Well, and, a big part of Binance's move there with BNB going from an exchange token to a network token was to try to capture the same values as Ethereum. So I can see why, even at that simple level, with no benevolent server that's trying to peg it, right. At the sentiment level, I could see people going, it should be completely correlated. And they both have congestion issues, although actually Smart Chain is sometimes worse. But yeah, they're much the muchness, so they should be a lot closer than, say, Ethereum is to Bitcoin.
That's correct. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Now, if you look at Solana, though, that one seems to be, standing out in the crowd a little bit. It is not going through the same motion. We have seen it fall more sharply, and then we've also seen it recover a little more sharply. The volumes aren't very high in Solana, right? And there's also the backing of FTX, which is, I believe, definitely making market on this token. So I don't know, like what's going on in here, but I do see, just from a price action, I do see Solana staying strong. What this tells me is, if the market is going to turn and become bullish, Solana might be the one that might see like a very fast price action, right? It might see some new all-time highs or something. And likewise, if the market turns extremely bearish, we might see a pullback like this. So just, I think the delta change in something like Solana might be slightly different from the delta change in the other ones like ETH and BNB, because they seem to be very correlated, going in small moves. Solana's kind of separated itself from the pack a little bit.
Sure.
So I think that's what it appears like. And again, it's a young chain. Solana is still trying to set things up. They raised a big round. They're trying to do this whole developer push. So maybe it's the other factors that's just driving interest in Solana and people acquiring Solana, which may be pushing the price up. It may just be usage of the token as opposed to just pure speculation, right? So there might be something like that for sure. Now, if you look at Polkadot, it has pulled back a little bit more than both ETH and BNB. I feel like this is actually, in some sense, completely in line with how these different networks have seen traction, right? So Polkadot started a little earlier, but I don't think DOT has had the same level of DeFi traction and other excitement that obviously ETH has had, and then BNB kind of took over some of that. So if you start looking at ETH and BNB, they're highly correlated. Now, DOT also has the same story. It's also trying to be a network, but a lot of DOT's thing is promise, right? So when the market is turning a little bearish and the market is turning a little more cautious, what we're seeing is that although this is also range bound, right? So in terms of range bound movement, it doesn't look any different from any of the others we saw, but it has pulled back a little further. So, the other two have pulled back. In fact, if you look at it, this is an interesting trend here to look at. So ETH pulled back a little less than 50%, right? So it's like whatever, somewhere around, I would say 45% pullback roughly, right? BNB has pulled back to about 50%, right? So a little more pullback. And then DOT has pulled back even further to about 55% or so. So it's interesting. The amount of pullback, is sort of, in some sense, related to how popular the network is, right? If you're more popular, real things are happening. Your pullback is a little less. The next in line goes next, and then ones which are primarily on sort of promise have pulled back even further. So there's a little trend there, if you may.
And yeah, there's also a lot more candles printed below the 200 EMA for DOT.
Correct. So we did see that sharp, when the decline happened on May 19th and around, I think the price fell all the way from, this was $49, 49, and it came to 13. So that was a huge drop. In fact, it pulled all the way back to, where did it go? Yeah, more than 0.786. So really, from a Fibonacci standpoint, was almost going back to where it started. It had pulled all the way back there. And in fact, I remember we had made this marker here saying if it really touches 10.386, it would have, because there was like a real resistance here at some point in time, it would have really completed its full journey. It would have gone up, taken the full tour, and come back down to this level of about $10. But yeah, that's the story with DOT. Very quickly to look at Matic. Matic has seen a lot of action. Matic seems to be behaving a little bit more like Solana, just kind of being on its own. Again, newer chain. The rise is more recent for Matic. April was the month for Matic really when it took off, April and then May. And I think Matic in some sense definitely still seeing a lot of action, right? And we'll see what happens in the mid to long term. Still a very young, young chain from a standpoint of new adoption, and it being now trying to ride the DeFi wave, if you may.
Yeah, and it's also trying to do that at a different scale. But one of the interesting commentaries I was seeing was just the number of small ARB trades that were happening. So now that there are some of the DeFi protocols deployed on Matic, it makes sense to do a transaction with single-digit cent value and pay the fraction of a cent fees. So at points there was congestion, not unlike what you see on Ethereum, and just at a different scale in terms of frequency and the cost elements there. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see whether all of these kind of scaling solutions really have enough scale to handle algorithmic and arbitrage type of activities.
Yeah, that's actually a good point there. And I think we'll see these evolve. So what you're really saying, and I think you're making a great point there, is that a lot of this scaling and a lot of this sort of action on the token itself, because this token essentially ends up becoming a network token, would be function also of the type of activity, right? And the richness of the activity, right? That itself would kind of determine how it gets adopted and who buys it and how often, and so on and so forth, right? And thereby also sort of tying it back with scale. So yeah, that's true. That's actually a very good point.
Yeah, and the nice thing is, and this is also part of, I guess, kind of the sharding part of the scaling narrative, is that some of these activities that do need a higher frequency and a lower cost to be profitable will move into specific shards. We're kind of seeing that now already with the layer 2s, that some of the activity can free up space on Ethereum on the layer 1 if it's only profitable to do that type of activity now on a layer 2. So yeah, that'll be another interesting thing to watch more, and it might mess with some of the people who are following on-chain metrics like number of Ethereum transactions, because those are a lot lower since Matic launch.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Good point there. Okay, let's quickly look at DeFi tokens. I think a couple of them were requested. We can't see it all, like we mentioned, but let's look at Link, SNX, maybe a couple of them. So yeah, so Link also has pulled back a fair bit.
Yeah, Link was also unfortunate in that, they kind of announced a V2 and, what should have been quite a big celebrated announcement there mid-April, and the price has, followed the market and really gone the other direction. So they're struggling with their technical, kind of narrative to be heard of, actually, there's some really awesome things coming. That perhaps aren't reflected in the price and the direction the price is heading.
That's right, yeah. This one seems to be more volatile also. I mean, of course, the scale is slightly different. It's a $25 base as opposed to a few $100s. But if you just look at, let's say, Link USD versus DOT, right? So DOT pulled back sharply. Of course, they're not apples to apples, right? This is a network token. That is more of a DeFi token. But the price, of course, every token price pulled back sharply in those days when the market was correcting, but then this has become very range bound, right? And why I picked up DOT is because the price is roughly around that level, right? The $25 price point. And then when I look at Link here, the price pulled back sharply, but then even after that, the price has hovered from 35 to 19. So $20 to $35 has gone up and down, right? So unlike others which have like a $5 price range, this one seems to be having a $15 price range, and so which means it's so for some reason way more volatile. Perhaps again from a swing trader's standpoint, there is more to be traded, right? You have a wider gap, so you can enter and exit at different positions. You don't have to take the whole swing, right? Like you could enter a position here short and just exit right here, and similarly. So there might be some opportunity here for sure, but I think one will have to read this a little bit more to see where Link is headed. Link seems to be in an interesting place. Now, last three, look at this, like last 3 candles, 4 candles. This one is, of course, sort of indecision. These candles have been all green. And even today it has opened green when we saw that things like Bitcoin were turning red. So that's interesting. So if you look at Bitcoin, it's been turning red. I think ETH is still just about begun, unsure where it's going. But if you look at Link, the market has opened green. Of course, it's not again apples to apples, but I'm just saying the sentiment for Link seems to be positive. So I have a feeling it'll probably pull back. This is also, look at this. This is the 200 EMA and this is the 50. So it seems to be moving quite, in a very broad range, super volatile. It goes up above 50, touches 50, goes all the way down way below 200 EMA, and sort of a huge price swing. We'll see if this comes up and breaches above 200 and goes back up, or swings back down. So yeah, this is an interesting one to look at. I believe SNX is going through its own motion. Like, SNX seems to be all down, down, and down. What happened to SNX? Did something go wrong at SNX?
Not necessarily that it's gone wrong or there's technical failures. There is just still inefficiencies in some of the synthetics to really stick within the price that the market would expect them to be. And so, yeah, it's really tricky. People can lose faith in a system if it just doesn't seem to be as efficient as it should be.
Yeah, so this is interesting.
Guys, they've already moved some of the elements like staking onto a layer 2, but they haven't been able to move the whole market function there yet.
Yeah, agreed. No, that's a valid point. I just wanted to show one of these. For example, if you go with, let's draw this piece here. So let's say we just take this brush here, right? So if you look at this segment, right, this was all pretty much range bound, right? It was moving between 14 and 22, and for the most part we saw this even when everything else was going up and down. This is still since February, by the way, so this is not new, right? We saw it being very range bound, synthetics, right? But when the market crashed, it's pulled back all the way. It's just been like a big crash for synthetics. So that's interesting. And let's see what Aave has done, because Aave was again range bound for a long time. Well, see, Aave hasn't done that badly. So Aave was also between these two ranges, right? About 420 and 302. We saw that up and down in synthetic style, but right now it has pulled back, but it's not all the way down like SNX. If you look at SNX, it's boom down, right? So half the value from this level of support, 14 has close to half, right? $8 has been, 8 and a change has been tested. That hasn't happened for Aave, right? We don't see that sharp pullback or anything like that. We are not seeing the Aave price drop all the way here to a couple of $100. So yeah, that's interesting to notice. I guess Maker would be similar. Maker movements, again, I don't know what to read of Maker movement. Because Maker, yeah, trying to think here.
Yeah, Maker's still, kind of trying to get some of the parameters right in terms of the DAI savings rate across different vaults and collaterals. And in some sense, it's becoming more of a reserve bank, just kind of a reference rate, and all the yield and exciting things happens on Aave and Compound and Yearn. So it's interesting to see that, how that plays out for actually holding the Maker tokens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think that's the bunch. I think people had asked for ICP also and VET. I'll just look at ICP. I haven't looked at VET, so maybe next time.
Very little data there since the
very little. And look at
launch.
This. Yeah, look at this. Launch the first day, big wick. I don't even know what to make of this, but it opened up, or at least reached that day's high to 2,822. And then now it's at $67. I don't even know what to say at this point in time. Because
yeah, I mean, the IOU market before they launched was for a long time around that $50 to $100. And yeah, so this is where I expect the market to be now that there's liquidity.
Right.
They still have, for everybody that participated in the actual crowd sale and then the airdrops and things, there's a monthly vesting schedule. So we should see more supply come on the market, and it should normalize to just the point that people had kind of agreed upon to some extent prior to launch. And yeah, until we actually see adoption of Dfinity, I don't think we're going to see any market actions. What's interesting though is it's completely decorrelated from Bitcoin or Ethereum. Right? We're not seeing,
yes. I mean, it's a young one, but you're right. It has a life of its own. It's trying to figure out what's happening there. At the ICP level, somebody had asked this question on Twitter. In fact, how do we compare ICP with Solana? My response to that was that I think I see Solana, being a little more aggressive and perhaps making more strides. That's what I had said. But any opinions on that? What do you think?
I'd say they've both got the same size of marketing budgets and R&D spend. So I think what gives Solana the slight advantage is they can show more traction, right? They've got things happening on chain, and Dfinity being almost a whole year behind in terms of months of activity, it just doesn't have the same traction yet. And until it does, I don't think it's going to compare with Solana very well if Solana keeps pulling ahead.
Makes sense. No, 100%. Totally makes sense. Okay, wonderful. So I think we've covered most of it. I don't know if there is anything else that you see that our audience would like us to cover, but as we mentioned, we'll certainly cover more of this in the next few days. Newsletter. We'll also try to analyze and keep an eye on the market to see where it's headed. But, very truthfully, we are seeing this to be a range-bound market for a bit, unless, some new data point comes in or some new thing just pulls it out of its current sort of, state of confusion, if you may.
Yeah, no, completely agree with you there. It's going to take something pretty significant to really change things around from the current market we're in. And I mean, we titled this episode kind of 20K or 50K, and we still are closing. We don't have the answer. It's uncertainty, really, all around.
Yeah, that's true. My sense is also that, it took Bitcoin about 40 days to break this kind of same impasse earlier in the year. And then before it went up 50 and 60K. And I think we are on day 27, as we were seeing from the number of candles we were counting. So give it another 10 days, maybe, right? And a little bit of up and down movement, and maybe it'll find something, right? Maybe it'll find by then we would be in a position to say 20K or 50K. Probabilistically, there are still a lot of indications that it has turned bearish, but there's no strong signals to say it is going to 20K for sure. And 50K is always possible. Anything is possible in the world of Bitcoin. So we don't know.
And with all of these kind of market indicators and charts, all we can do is look backwards, right? We can't predict the future, but yeah, making sense of the present certainly helps. So I hope everyone's learned something from this episode, and yeah, we really look forward to, in another week's time, putting out another episode and seeing what's changed and if there's a clearer trend forming.
Yes, 100%. And do keep the questions coming. Ask us the questions. Send us your comments. If there are specific pieces or specific models that is of interest, we can certainly dig into it. Maybe that's what we should do also in a future version, where not only we look at these specific charts, but we can look at some other measures like on-chain data, as we had said, or just adoption rates or a few other metrics that might be worth looking at.
Excellent. Well, yeah, thanks for tuning in, and yeah, do follow us at Going Elliptic and engage with us there as well. And we look forward to seeing you all in another week.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Super.
Thanks, Shanky.
Thank you, Paul.